Shalom! Welcome to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein of the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines and also by Dexter Van Zile of camera.org. We'll hear from Dexter and Mark both in just a few minutes. Right now is the world in 5 minutes. And the big topic of the day is the fact that after weeks of negotiations and really probably discussions going over a much longer period of time than that, the Russians have now said that they are going to send S-300 missile defense system to Syria to help defend its airspace. Syria purchased this system from Russia years ago, and it's been tied up because of diplomacy and the political situation. But here we are in the middle of a civil war in Syria with a slaughter going on, with Assad's armed forces killing people in the streets, and Russia decides that this is the appropriate time to send an air defense system to Syria. Clearly, this has to have some impact, some relation, I should say, to relations with the United States and with Israel as well, because the United States and Israel, along with European powers, have threatened to act in Syria or act against Syria if Assad does not stop killing his people. So the implications of sending this air defense system clearly have nothing to do with the civil war, because the opponents of Assad's government in Syria are not sending airplanes after him that he needs an air defense system to defend against. Clearly, this has to do more with possible Israeli strikes or American or European strikes against Assad's government. In the meantime, it becomes a game changer, and if Assad gets to the point where he is sending weaponry against Israel, or should he fall, and this could be part of what's going on, should he fall and opponents take over, opponents that are potentially hostile to Israel, it may force Israel's hand either to support the regime against those rebels or to go in and install a stable government. So either way, this bodes very badly in the long run for Israel and Western attempts to remove Assad from power. In addition to all of these various things, you've had multiple scandals in the last couple of weeks involving the Obama administration and different branches of the Obama administration that have certainly taken attention away from various foreign policy issues. The primary concern in foreign policy seems to be what happened in September in Benghazi rather than what's going on right now anywhere in the world. And with the State Department bogged down in responding to criticism and the White House in general bogged down in responding to criticism, we can be fairly assured that we're going to have a risk-adverse administration in the coming months. So many issues that could arise that might be controversial, such as military action in Syria or any attempts to do anything with Iran, could potentially be jeopardized simply because we have risk adversity in the administration right now. In addition to that, we also still have sequestration and funding issues that are going to impact what we're able to do, what the United States is able to do, and also what Israel is able to do. Many of you may not know that Israel's budget situation, regardless of any potential cuts to American foreign aid to Israel, has been suffering as well because of economic issues. And Israel has cut its own military budget by, looks like, a couple of $2 billion over the next year, which is also going to hamper what it's able to do militarily going forward, at least for the coming year. So as we're looking at the possibility of multiple military situations, either with Iran or with Syria, we can see that there are major problems there. In the meantime, with all of this going on, the State Department has been trying to restart peace talks with Israel and between Israel and the Palestinians, and there seems to be some support for that coming from the traditional peace community, the community that has trying to promote Israeli-Palestinian peace for some time. But within Israel at large, while there's desire for peace, it seems to be that economic issues and the issues of Syria and Iran, along with Egypt as well, seem to be the more prominent issues that people are concerned about. Right now, in the United States and in Europe, there is a tremendous increase, or we're seeing a tremendous increase in anti-Semitism and especially in anti-Israel activity on college campuses, in church groups, and even in governmental groups. And perhaps we'll get into some of that conversation following our break with Dexter Van Zile. Dexter Van Zile not only will be joining us in the studio today to talk a little bit about his experience with 60 Minutes and their program on Christians in the Middle East and some of the other things that he does with Christian peace groups and churches, but he will be speaking at Temple B'nai Jeshurun tonight, my own congregation here at 5101 Grand Avenue in Des Moines, starting at 7 o'clock tonight, and you're welcome to attend that. It's free of charge. That is The World in 5 minutes.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live. From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Whether you're 10, 25, 50, 80 years old and beyond, everyone needs to live within their means. I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America. For almost a quarter of a century, we've helped people of all ages learn to manage their personal finances to benefit them far into the future. When problems arise, we've got the experience you need to make those debt problems go away. Got financial problems? Call Consumer Credit of America.
Drink, dance, party. Kitty's is the ultimate dance club in Des Moines. A huge dance floor with room to move, 3 bars to keep your drinks full, and kickin' DJs playing all your favorite dance music. At Kitty's, we've always got your birthday party planned with Birthday Fridays. That's right, when your birthday rolls around, there's only one place to go. Gather up your friends and head to Kitty's, where you drink free on the Friday of your birthday week. Find out more about Birthday Fridays at kittysusa.com. Kitty's, all kinds of people, all kinds of music, all kinds of fun.
If Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of America was your personal webmaster, Tom would filter out all bad debt emails. If Tom was your mailman, you'd never get any debt reduction junk mail. If Tom Coates was a lineman, he'd block any phone calls offering to reduce your credit card debt.
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America, and we're still your best choice for credit counseling. We're local, we're accountable, and we can do more. You make the call when the time's right for you.
When it comes to competition, there really is none for Consumer Credit of America.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein of the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines and by Dexter Van Zile of Camera. I'd like to thank our benefactor of this show, Dr. Ronald Bergman of Bergman Folkers Cosmetic Surgery and Spa. for his continued support and enabling us to have wonderful guests like Dexter Van Zile on our show. Dexter, I'd like you to say a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, I am the Christian media analyst for the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America. And CAMERA was founded in the early 1980s by a social worker by the name of Winifred Meiselman down in Washington, D.C. She founded CAMERA in response to the biased coverage that the Washington Post was providing about Israel's invasion of Lebanon. The PLO was using Lebanon basically as an aircraft carrier to launch rocket and terror attacks against Israel. And what happened was that the Washington Post didn't really do a particularly good job of covering the manner in which the PLO basically terrorized Israel and the Lebanese people. And the organization then became kind of a powerhouse as it had chapters throughout the country. And what we do now, our headquarters is now in Boston, Massachusetts, and Andrea Levin has been the executive director since the late 1980s, and CAMERA's become a powerhouse under her leadership. And essentially, what we do is we monitor the media. We, look at the New York Times, CNN, and all of the major news outlets throughout the world. And now we have a relationship with media analysts also in Great Britain. We've helped support a group called BBC Watch and SIF Watch, which deals with The Guardian. And what we do is basically look at the media coverage of the Arab-Israeli conflict and point out the bias. One of the things that we routinely find is that people don't want to cover anti-Israel incitement. They don't want to deal with the issue of anti-Semitism in the Arab countries that surround Israel. And lately, since 2006, I started dealing at CAMERA with the Christian peacemaking community. That work's tapered off a little bit, particularly in the mainline community. But what we discovered is that the liberal Protestant churches really offered up a narrative about the Arab-Israeli conflict that basically showed that Israel could end the conflict, or suggested that Israel could end the conflict unilaterally by coming up with a magical, combination of withdrawals and concessions. And they never really dealt with any of the more troubling aspects of the conflict. More recently, I have been dealing with the issues related to the mistreatment of Christians in Muslim-majority countries in the Middle East, because the ideology used to justify and motivate these attacks in countries like Iraq and Syria is also the same ideology that is used to justify attacks against Israel as well. I started out in 2006. Prior to that, I worked for the David Project, but I used to be a member of the United Church of Christ. Now I'm a Roman Catholic. And CAMERA is a member of the Conference of Presidents of major Jewish organizations. And a lot of the times my work consists of, I tell people, I get up in front of audiences and I say, look, I am a former liberal Protestant who's now a Roman Catholic who works for a Jewish organization who speaks to evangelicals about the suffering endured by Orthodox Christians in the Middle East. And and I wake up in the morning and I feel like my head's about ready to spin off my shoulders. And I think that's basically in a nutshell what's been going on.
Dexter, what motivates media bias against Israel?
I think a lot of it has to do with underdogma, this notion. And there is actually a book out there, and I can't remember the name of the author, but I've read it. It's called Underdogma, where people want to essentially associate with the underdog, and they look at Israel's adversaries as innocent victims, and victims of imperialism and colonialism and racism, and they essentially regard Israel and Jews as the interlopers in the region. And they look at Israel as if it's basically just a bunch of Ashkenazi European Jews that came in to steal the land from the Palestinians. And when you ask people, well, what about the Jews from Arab lands? They don't know that much about it. When you ask them about the status of what it was like for Jews in Muslim-majority countries in the Middle East, they don't really know very much about it, and they'll say something about Andalusia, or they'll say something about, there was a golden age of religious tolerance between Muslims and Jews. but then when you actually get right down to it and start talking to them about the human rights implications of dhimmitude or the status of non-Muslims in Muslim-majority countries, they're not all that articulate, they're not conversant in the subjects, and they really are reluctant to address the issue head on.
Average Americans do have a positive feeling about Israel.
Yeah. Right now, I think support for Israel is at a record high. But what happens is that we see that institutions in the United States that are suffering a loss of prestige and status, for example, mainline Protestant churches, they've embraced anti-Zionist activism as a way to kind of set themselves off. And I think also it has something to do with the fact that they, whenever any community finds itself declining in status or influence in American society, we've seen this pattern before. They generally end up exhibiting signs of anti-Semitism. And because what happens is that American Jews are successful, they're productive, and what happens is that when people find themselves slipping in status in American society, they lash out, and anti-Zionism is one way to lash out. I know that's, and there's other reasons, ideological reasons as well. I think mainline Protestants, the peacemakers, are motivated by a utopian view of the human condition in the international system. And Israeli and Jewish history disconfirms a lot of that. And ultimately, if you have a tragic view of humanity, which I think is a mature view, you're going to be able to deal with issues raised by the Arab-Israeli conflict much more successfully and much more responsibly than if you're motivated by a millennial or utopian view that we can make everything work out.
You would think that the university is the place to put things on the table and to look at them dispassionately. What do you find?
I think that right now, and this is part of a bigger problem, is that I think the American intellectual scene is not as robust as it should be. And I think a lot of it is motivated by Western guilt. And what happens is they're looking for a place to lay this guilt off onto. And one way to do it, and they don't really want to have to embrace it themselves. They don't want to, I mean, if you look at, basically a lot of the peace activists, they're motivated by, for lack of a better word, white liberal guilt. And they're looking for a way to somehow demonstrate that they don't want to stand in solidarity with the imperialism or the history of American imperialism or the Vietnam War. They want to demonstrate that they are good people who stand in opposition to Israel, to imperialism. And one way to do that is to basically, condemn Israel. The irony is that one of the things that we've seen is that, the Islamists in the Middle East are in many respects the most imperialist people, culturally imperialist people in the world today. Islamism represents the great threat to human rights and world peace in the world today, but it's much safer to condemn Israel, largely because they're viewed as kind of an extension of the Western European, North American complex, is the way to put it, I guess.
Why are such critics as Noam Chomsky so impressive or so attractive?
I think one of the reasons why is because there's always, when you express indifference to Islamist hostility towards Israel, I think you legitimately open yourself up to the charge of anti-Semitism. I think, ultimately and this is one of the things, for me, the Holocaust still is a trauma for a lot of even Christians, okay, and people who are secular-minded, people who want to believe that, that the human condition can always be improved and that we can always fix things, and that human nature is ultimately something that can be bettered, which I like to believe myself. But what happens is that people know that by ignoring Islamist hostility towards Israel, they're doing something wrong, and they need something to cover over that sin, so to speak. And so they invoke people like Noam Chomsky, or they'll embrace narratives offered by people like Mark Ellis, who is a Jewish liberation theologian, or Mark Braverman. And what happens is that they will basically use the writings of these folks to say you don't have to pay, that demonstrate or suggest we don't have to pay attention to Islamist hostility towards Israel because, look, if it was a problem, don't you think these people would say something about it?
Now, Dexter, where do you think that supersessionist theology plays a role in this? Is that the churches believe that Christians have inherited the blessings of the Jews in ancient times, and this idea that the Jews don't have any religious claim to the land either?
Christian supersessionism, the notion that somehow that the Jews are cast off by God and no longer have a role to play in God's plan for humanity, has always been kind of has had a crippling impact on Christians. In Europe, prior to World War II, during the rise of Nazism, German and European Christians had a difficult time dealing with this supersessionism. For example, there was a Barmen Declaration that was basically a ringing denunciation of Nazism and totalitarianism and said that good Christians cannot follow Hitler. But if you look at the document itself, it makes no mention whatsoever about Nazism's anti-Semitism. And you would think that they would say something about it because that was one of Nazism's most salient characteristics. But they said nothing about it in the Barmen Declaration. And this was the one theological stand or in opposition to Nazism that people point to, and they always kind of acknowledge, well, they didn't say anything about the Jews. And the reason why is because I think they accepted an awful lot of the suppositions that Nazism had about the Jews, and they could not actually combat them. And towards the end of his life, Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, we should have stood in solidarity with the Jews. The same process has taken place today. And the thing is that right now what has happened is that because, the Islamists, and this is going to be something that you'll get an awful lot of pushback if you mention it to them, but why is it that a lot of the peace activists within the mainline Protestant community have been so quiet about Islamist anti-Semitism and about the issue of anti-Semitism within Islam? Part of the problem is that people feel, well, look, we have a problem ourselves and we shouldn't say anything about it. But the second people inject themselves into the Arab-Israeli conflict, it's an issue that they need to address. And so I think the supersessionism, on one hand, the Christian world has, for the most part, not entirely denounced it and said this is wrong, but they haven't changed their habits of mind or their patterns of speech to be able to say, okay, Christian supersessionism is bad, and so, by the way, is Muslim supersessionism, and that is a reality. And I think that, and the thing is that because these institutions have been so focused, monomaniacally focused on Israel, and been so quiet about Islamist hostility towards Jews, they are now in a position where it's going to be difficult for them to speak openly about Muslim hostility towards Christians. Because once they start speaking about it, it's going to say, well, wait a minute. We've just seen a couple of decades worth of Islamist hostility towards Jews in Israel, and you didn't say anything about it. So now all of a sudden you want to raise your voice on behalf of the Christians in the region, which is a good thing, but where were you the 2 decades before? Or, where have you been? And I think so we're caught between two supersessionisms, our own towards the Jews and Islamist or actually, frankly, Muslim supersessionism towards Christians and Jews.
Now, the Christian supersessionist ideas, I think, play a significant role in Palestinian Christian understanding. I've seen that from a number of Palestinian Christian leaders, and I know you were significantly involved in the CBS 60 Minutes discussion about the Christians of the Holy Land program that they ran. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. One of the things we need to understand is that the Palestinian Christian community has basically been one of the most persistent sources of anti-Israel invective for decades, at least since the Six-Day War. And ultimately, Christians throughout the Middle East have always been somewhat anti-Zionist, largely because they regarded, Jewish sovereignty and Israel's existence as something that it was going to make it more difficult for them to get along with Muslims in the region. And what has happened is that people don't understand this history. They don't understand that. And so when Palestinian Christians approach institutions in the United States, like mainline Protestant churches, and say, Israel is the reason why we're suffering, people are willing to believe it. They'll believe it because because they have a very difficult time thinking that Christian leaders would offer up such a distorted narrative. And that's what happened with CBS News. On April 22nd of 2012, CBS News aired a piece called Christians in the Holy Land, or Christians of the Holy Land, but basically it was about Palestinian Christians, mostly in the West Bank. They did a little bit about Jerusalem. And it was the Palestinian Christian narrative down the line. We're suffering not because of Islamist hostility towards us. Everything is okay. And people who try to say that are just basically troublemaking Zionists. That's the story that came out. Or they said that's an excellent talking point, a great thing to sell to the American people, but it's not really true. And then they basically portrayed Bethlehem as an open-air prison, and then they offered up a factual error that the security barrier completely surrounded Bethlehem. And there were other problems with this. We pointed out essentially 4 major problems with it. CBS News, we wrote an article about it on our website. We did an alert. We spoke to our supporters about it. We asked them to contact CBS News. We went to a shareholders meeting. All of this under the generalship of Andrea Levin. She basically says, "Okay, this is what we're going to do," and she's been at this for a long time. She knows how to do it. All I did was the research and the writing. And another thing we did, which is Cameron took out an ad in the Wall Street Journal in August, several months after the piece aired, largely because 60 Minutes stonewalled on every one of our complaints, even on the security barrier, which was just like a black and white factual misstatement. It's not true. And at a certain point, we just kind of said, well, they know we're here. We understand that they're not, probably not going to make any corrections, but at least they know that they made a mistake. And then what happened is that this past April 7th, Jeff Fager, the chairman of CBS News, who was also deeply involved in 60 Minutes, I think he was its executive producer, and had been for years prior to being chairman. I think he still is the executive producer for that show as well. He got up he was invited to speak at his church in New Canaan, Connecticut, and an Episcopal church, St. Mark's Episcopal Church. And he got up and he showed the episode again. He handed out a copy of the ad that appeared in the Wall Street Journal, went down at point by point and tried to refute everything that we said, and then said, and they say that the security barrier doesn't completely surround Bethlehem. They're wrong. Bethlehem is surrounded by a wall. Well, at that point, unbeknownst to Jeff Fager, I was sitting in the back of the audience because I had made the drive down. I raised my hand. I said, "I'm Dexter Van Zile. I'm the Christian media analyst for the Committee for Accuracy in Middle East Reporting in America. We're the folks who made the ad. And a few moments ago, you said that the security barrier completely surrounds Bethlehem." I said, "If you can prove that, I'll give $5,000 to a charity of your choice." And he said, "Okay." And I sat down. And that was it. And there was about 200 to 300 people in the room, but I hope, and I'm not sure that it did, but I hope it conveyed to the people who were there in that room that there was a serious problem. And there was a number of serious problems, but I wanted to at least highlight that one with the show that aired. Okay? And I think at this point right now, camera is, we're continuing for sure to basically, deal with this issue and to try and somehow raise the issue and say 60 Minutes got it wrong. They need to correct the record. It's not just a security barrier issue that they got wrong. And I think ultimately we're going to educate 60 Minutes to say, you need to subject the Palestinian Christian narrative to just as much scrutiny as you would any other narrative that somebody approached you with. And that's not what they did. And that's the problem. The problem is that people were willing to basically believe anything that the Palestinian Christians said as if it was the gospel truth, even though there's mountains of evidence to contradict it.
And what were the other issues that were in that show?
One of the issues was they talked about how the Palestinian Christian population is dwindling. Well, the fact is that the percentage of Christians in the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem in total is declining. It's down to about less than 2%. But in absolute numbers, the numbers have actually increased over the years. And you can see the details on our website at camera.org. And what happened is that they just talked about the dwindling population and the decreasing percentages. And what that does is that it basically obscures a very important reality is that the Christian population in absolute terms is increasing. Now, many Palestinian Christians are leaving, but the fact is that Palestinian Christians have a lower fertility rate than Muslims and Jews. That's a fact. And so that's one of the reasons why their percentage of the population is decreasing. And so that was one of the big problems. Another problem was that they portrayed this Kairos document, which was issued by Palestinian Christians in December of 2009, as some sort of peacemaking document that was unprecedented. We didn't go after that unprecedented notion. The fact is that Palestinian and Arab Christians have been issuing statements like this for decades. It wasn't unprecedented. And what they did was they tried to portray it as if it were some sort of peacemaking document that was signed by the religious leaders, by the leaders of the 13 denominations in the Holy Land. Well, the fact is that's not true. And the document itself is problematic. The Central Conference of American Rabbis declared the document supersessionist and anti-Semitic. But what happened was the Palestinian Christians presented it to CBS News and said, look at this wonderful peacemaking document. Bob Simon, who was the reporter, who clearly doesn't know what he's talking about, quite frankly, and he's handed this document. He goes along with it. He thinks, okay, I'm going to believe it. And that was one of the other. That was one of the bigger problems. Another problem that we had with the report was that they said that the Palestinian Christians, unlike Christians elsewhere in the Middle East, are not the subject of or target of violence. To be fair, they are not getting murdered in the streets like they are in, say, Egypt. They're not being subjected to attacks like they are in Iraq or in Syria.
Or arrest like in Iran.
Right. But the fact is that there has been a persistent strain of hostility towards Muslim hostility or Islamist hostility, however you want to phrase it. I think it's rooted in, traditional Islam, and people can argue about that, and I'm willing to listen to people make that argument. But the fact is that there is hostility towards Christians in Palestinian society, and they have been, had their property stolen. In some instances, they've been killed. And what happened was that reality was ignored completely in the story, and they said that was just a talking point meant to basically make the Palestinians look bad. And so clearly, they blew the story. They really blew the story from start to finish. They blew the story, and the thing about Jeff Fager's presentation at St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan was that it was clear that he didn't get it. He didn't understand that, there was a problem. If they had just gone on and not said anything, it would have been one thing. But for him to basically somehow try and defend this story so vocally, despite its manifest problems and obvious factual errors, it made it clear to camera that we couldn't stop.
We're going to take a short break here. I think when we get back from our break, we'll talk a little bit about boycott, divestment, and sanctions proposals in the mainline Christian churches. I really want to hear from you about that. This has been Understanding the World, and when we get back from our break, more from Dexter Van Zile.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
I'm Brian Leach, owner and general manager of Service Legends. I brought along a couple of the home comfort heroes.
Hi, I'm Tammy Wells.
I am Nick Wondershide.
I'm administrative manager.
I'm the senior technician
from Service Legends.
It seems like every good thing, when you feel it to the bone that it's good, there's a lot of hard work put behind it. I don't think that you can fake it and have it turn out good.
If we seem like, okay, that's just weird, it's just a furnace, why would you believe so deeply in a furnace? It's not just that, we want to show the world that you can have good service.
Yeah, it's got to be, it's your home.
It's built into our daily trainings, it's built into our culture. that we're going to do whatever it takes to have each client say they love us, period.
That's why we spend all the hours in the training that we do. And if we guarantee it's going to be a good experience for you, or else it's free, what type of work do you think we're going to do?
There is a guarantee.
Temperature selection guarantee, fixed right or it's free guarantee, comfort guarantee, best value guarantee. All of these guarantees hold us accountable to ensuring that we exceed your expectations. And if for whatever reason we'd fail and we can't make it right, we guarantee all of those guarantees with a 100% money back guarantee.
I mean, if you don't think that your technician can fix it right, are you going to say that to a client? No.
You don't have to worry about having a technician come to your house.
We drug test, background check all of our team members. We put safe people in your home. Each and every one of our service techs, 400 hours a year in training.
You tell it the minute they walk in the door. They know what they're doing, they've done their homework, and they actually truly care about what you want.
Because at the end of the day, you're the person that makes sure I have a job.
They're going to be listening. They're going to want to know what your challenges are. Then they're going to come and give you options, and you get to choose.
If I'm there to help and I make it easy and painless, I did my job right that day.
Well, when it comes to your comfort, safety, and your family, you don't necessarily go buy the most expensive, but you get the most bang for your buck.
Oh, it's worth it, because there's a lot of people that will find a way to get it to work right now and then leave and then come back, charge you again, and the cycle just repeats itself. So when I'm out there looking at the furnace, I want to find why it failed today. How can we change the part today with something that you're not going to have to worry about? Is it worth changing the part today? I mean, you can put a lot of money into a furnace. I can fix parts all day. There's good job security in that for me, but is it the right thing for you?
I get a lot of the phone calls of after the technicians are there. They're just in awe. They're like, wow, you guys are great. I mean, I don't even know what to say. You guys are great. Everything you did was perfect. It was great.
Keep going though, I like this.
Just give us a try. I'm gonna take all the risk.
I've got the time to make this right. I've got the support to make it right.
Just check us out.
And if you don't see the value in what we do,
I mean, fixed right or it's free or 100% money back.
enough said.
Welcome back to Understanding the World. I'm Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein and by our special guest today, Dexter Van Zile of Camera. I'd like to once again thank Dr. Ronald Bergman and Bergman Folkers Cosmetic Surgery and Spa for their sponsorship of the show. And Dexter, we're talking about Christians in the Holy Land, and the impact of that narrative has led some of our mainline Christian churches in the United States to consider boycotting or divesting or imposing sanctions in various forms on Israel. And among the major groups that's been talking about this for a while, the Presbyterian Church. And you were involved in kind of helping to combat that.
Yeah, I started this work in 2005 when I started to work for the David Project Center for Jewish Leadership. When I first started working for it, it was just the David Project. What happened was in 2004, the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church USA, which has probably got about 2 million members about now, maybe less than 2 million, they passed a resolution that called on the church to sell its stock in companies that did business with Israel's military establishment, or to initiate a process of phased selective divestment. And it also declared that the occupation was the cause or the root of violence against innocents on both sides of the conflict. And what happened is that this was basically passed largely as the result of a coalition of, anti-Israel activists in the Presbyterian Church that are comprised of, probably some supersessionist theologians, and also and under the influence of Palestinian Christians who said, "Look, this is what we need you to do." And what happened was that overture, the passage of that overture, set off basically a decade's worth of debate and fighting within that church that really hasn't ended today. And it's 2013. We're coming up basically on the 10th anniversary of the passage of that resolution, and virtually every time they meet, which is every 2 years, they fight about the Arab-Israeli conflict. The following year, they backed off a little bit and stopped singling Israel out for divestment, but they never stopped the divestment process. But one of the difficulties that we see is that what they did was they basically, singled Israel out for condemnation, and other denominations started to pick up that resolution as well. The United Church of Christ passed a quasi-divestment resolution in 2005, and they also passed a tear down the wall resolution along with the Disciples of Christ, which they share a common global ministries board. And ultimately, it was the same type of coalition. It was, peace activists that were clearly obsessed with Israel and kind of have a clear tendency to ignore violence elsewhere in the Middle East and elsewhere in the world. Israel, for some reason, attracts their attention. And so then other churches debated it, the Episcopalians, and I don't want to, and there's a lot of details, because in order to speak about all of these, you have to kind of drill down and look at the exact language of every one of the churches and the resolutions. What happened is that it's pretty clear to me, speaking in global terms, and I don't want to be too precise, but it seems as if like the divestment doesn't seem to work, but they are actually being able to gain some traction on targeting companies that operate in the West Bank, Israeli companies that operate in the West Bank. That seems to be what they think is a winning strategy for them. The thing is that I look at all of these resolutions basically as a MacGuffin. And I don't know if you know what a MacGuffin is, but in Alfred Hitchcock movies, there's usually something that is used to draw your attention. Also in the Quentin Tarantino movie, what was it, Pulp Fiction, where there was the suitcase with a light in it, and you never found out what was in the light, but it basically drove the narrative. Do you remember that movie? That's what I think the BDS movement is in many respects. It basically gives people something to look at, talk about, while they point the finger of accusation at Israel at these national gatherings of these churches. And what happens is that while people are condemning Israel, pointing the finger of blame at Israel, they ignore manifest human rights problems elsewhere in the region and ignore terrible suffering of Christians and other religious and ethnic minorities in the region. And at a certain point, it has basically become the vehicle by which people just kind of hijack the intellect, the collective intellect of these churches. And by promoting this obsession, in many respects, what it's done, it's helped legitimize anti-Zionist rhetoric in mainstream society because, well, if the mainline churches are speaking about Israel like this, well, then how bad can it be? And in some instances, you will see expressions of anti-Semitism coming out of the mouths or the websites, the Facebook pages of the supporters. For example, there's a group, the Israel-Palestine Mission Network of the Presbyterian Church USA. They had a Facebook page a few years ago where they would post patently anti-Semitic cartoons on their Facebook page. I wrote letters to the denomination, said this is wrong, and they said, oh, well, it's not really our concern, it's not our problem, because they're kind of separate from the church, when in fact they were called into creation by a 2004 resolution that was at the General Assembly. It's part of the church itself, whether they want to admit it or not. If you wanted to write a check to these folks, you had to write a check to the Presbyterian Church USA. And what happened is that it became an instrument by which they built a coalition of people who every 2 years, or depending on how often they met, would show up and just, engage in invective against Israel. The problem is that we've never seen activists in any of these churches address the issue of, Islamist hostility towards Christians, and that's a problem.
I understand, Dexter, that PCUSA invited certain members of the Jewish community to address the convention.
It depends on what year you're talking about, but yeah, one of the things at the United Methodist Church, they met a couple of years ago. I think it was Jewish Voice for Peace that showed up in great numbers, and ultimately they were there to basically provide cover for people who said, "Why are you so obsessed about Israel?" And whenever that argument was made, people would come forward and say, well, you should be obsessed with Israel because of its human rights abuses. And oh, by the way, I'm Jewish, so you don't have to worry about that charge.
Can folks tell the difference between mainstream and fringe within the Jewish community?
I think for the most part, you have to tell them, you have to explain it to them. And at this point, it's for them, and I don't mean to disparage people in the Jewish community, but a lot of the times, a lot of the Jews that I meet, it's like a Christian is a Christian, and then you explain to them what's going on. I don't think that a lot of Christians really understand the verisimilitude or the diversity of opinion and the large reservoir of support for Israel on the part of the American Jewish community. One of the things that I saw was that when J Street was first announced and when it first was founded, there was a great effort on the part of Christian peacemakers and journalists such that were writing for Christian Century, which is the house organ for the mainline Protestant community, to say, look at what this is. This is another group of activists. Not all of the Jewish community is like an AIPAC supporter, so to speak. And they held it up like this is in opposition to AIPAC. And so that was an attempt to basically give people a clean conscience if they basically singled Israel out and engaged in a manner that delegitimized it.
Now, not all of J Street people are one-staters or
Right.
anti-Zionist.
Right.
But Jewish Voice for Peace is definitely a one-state solution organization.
I'm not. The thing is that at a certain point, and this is going to sound, they're so far beyond the pale, I don't pay much attention to them.
But to have a major denomination that has relations, as the Presbyterians do, with the Jewish community.
Or the Methodists.
Yeah. That was what
Or the Methodists.
Yeah, that was. Well, I think that was the point of that was to basically create like a Potemkin debate. To basically to say, look, we've got the Jewish community on our side. It's okay. It's okay. The thing is that the people who show up at these events, typically they vote on these resolutions towards the end. It's like after they've done all of the business they need to do to keep the church going or the denomination going,
Yes.
budget, any of the major controversies. And then what happens is that it's voted on the last day or the second to last day. That's usually what happens. But the thing is that it's a theater. This is basically an attempt on their part to somehow create a theater in which people then can justify voting against Israel, singling it out, and ignoring human rights abuses in the other parts of the Middle East. It's like a stage almost.
How representative do you think that these positions put forward by either the Methodists or the Presbyterians are reflective of the people in the pews?
They're not very representative, but the problem, and oftentimes they don't even pass. But the thing is that the impact that they have is that they basically just keep, first of all, they tie the churches up in endless controversy. And the vast majority of the people in these churches, I think, support Israel or wonder really what's going on. But the problem is that they're not as well organized and they're not as driven by their agenda as the anti-Israel folks.
When you see these churches doing this kind of anti-Israel programming, what I think of what I was trying to say here. What do you see as their driving force? I mean, I've heard from some people that they say that their driving force is that the U.S. Invests in Israel, the U.S. sends money to Israel, and therefore they have a reason to believe that they can affect Israel policy, but not the policy of the other countries. And from my perspective, I say, well, I guarantee you that if Israel received no money whatsoever from the United States, you would still be doing this. What's your response?
I think a lot of it is that they have beefs with people here in the United States. One of the insights that I've tried to cultivate on the part of people is that these statements have something to do with their ideological lens and how they view the Middle East and their worldview. But it also has to do with the relationships that they have and antagonisms that they have with other people here in the United States. And also how they view Scripture. And that's and what has happened is that the mainline churches have basically been in conflict, ideologically speaking, with evangelical Protestants in the United States for a long time. And, since maybe early 1900s. And what happens is that a lot of the evangelicals support Israel because they take a more literal view of Scripture, and that's part of it. Also, a lot of them, I think, have anti-Israelism as a proxy for anti-Americanism. And the thing is that since they're in the United States, it's not, anti-Americanism is not something that you really want to embrace too publicly. So what you need to do is you need some other target to lay that feeling off onto. And so what happens is that, and I don't want to like get too like Rene Girardian. I don't know if you've heard of Rene Girard, but it's like a scapegoat. What happens is that Israel becomes a scapegoat for all of the feelings that they have about the things that they think are wrong with the United States.
Our friends are probably not particularly reticent about expressing their criticism of the United States. Some of the clergy we bump into on a regular basis will say the first thing is the United States was the only country ever to use an atomic bomb, and that's the original sin. They don't use Israel as a scapegoat, but they see it as an extension of these values.
Maybe that's a better argument or a better description. But I think it has something to do with their feelings about the United States.
Definitely.
Would you like to say a minute or so about what you're going to speak about tonight?
Tonight, I'm basically going to talk about, what peace activists in the Christian community, how they view the Middle East and Israel, and how they have a tendency to ignore some of the other problems that exist in the region.
And kind of what peace looks like in their mind, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, that's so Dexter Van Zile is going to be speaking at Temple B'nai Jeshurun tonight. It's my congregation, 5101 Grand Avenue in Des Moines, from about 7 o'clock to about 8:30 or so tonight. And Mark, I wanted to give you a minute to talk about a big event we had this week, the groundbreaking for the new Iowa Holocaust Memorial.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to help with the groundbreaking ceremony for a new Holocaust memorial to be erected on the Capitol grounds of the state capitol in Iowa. The memorial is in dedication to the victims of the Holocaust in gratitude towards the liberators, Iowan troops who participated in the liberation of the concentration camps, and in honor of the survivors. This is a project of the Jacqueline and Myron Blank Foundation, and Rabbi as well took part in the dedication of the groundbreaking itself.
And it's in a beautiful location in the northwest corner of the Capitol grounds, the Iowa State Capitol grounds, right by the Historical Society, toward that side of the grounds. And there are going to be wonderful passages or inspiring passages on the monument itself, and it'll be a good place to bring students so that they can learn about what happened in the Holocaust, and hopefully to inspire them to make the words "never again" actually mean something, as opposed to just being words. I spoke at the state capitol, and I said that if saying "never again" means you're going to say "never again," you're not really doing anything. You actually have to do something about it. And to use the words of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial and Museum, their motto in Washington, D.C., their motto is "What you do matters," that each and every one of us can make a difference. And when we're talking about not only combating genocide, but we're talking about combating movements that are arrayed against Israel, the kind of things that our guest today, Dexter Van Zile, is working hard against, it's important for each and every one of us to do our best to speak to our Christian friends and to try to advocate on behalf of Israel as best we can. Thank you for joining us on the show today. Thank you, Dexter Van Zile, for being with us. Thank you to Mark Finkelstein for joining me today.
Thank you.
And our guest next week on the show is Mukesh Kapila, who will be talking about Sudan, the genocide in Darfur, the United Nations, and refugee situation. He is world famous, and we're very honored to have him Skyping in from London, England, next week.
At what time, David?
2 o'clock once again next week, right here on onetotalkto.com or webcast1live.com. Thank you for joining us, and have a good week.